All right, we'll start inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. I hope everyone is doing well, inshallah. And as we normally do on our Friday nights, we're going to be going through our tafsir session with the continuation of Surah Al-Rum, inshallah. So, before we start out tonight, I want to go through the quiz that we sent out, and alhamdulillah, a number of people have actually they participated in the quiz and they went through the questions, and I just wanted to go through the responses real quick so that we can start, inshallah, with the session. So the first question that we had was this. It was, why do people lie on the Day of Judgment? And we had a number of answers for that question. If I can just restart my browser. Okay. Why do people lie on the Day of Judgment even though they cannot get away with anything? So this is what we were talking about last session, and I'll touch on it again when we start today's session as well. We said that people will lie. The Quran says, وَكَانُوا بِعِبَادَتِهِمْ كَافِرِينَ. And when people are asked on that day about why they took things other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their Lord, many of them will lie on that day. And many of them will say that we were never mushrik, مَا كُنَّا مُشْرِكِينَ. And we said that the reason for this is fundamentally because these are people who used to lie in this world as well. So even though they know that they won't be able to get away with it in the next world, they will still try to lie on that day. Because that world is a reflection of this world, right? And when it's a reflection, it shows things the same way people used to do things in this world as well. Even though over there, the results of their actions are different. When you lied here, sometimes you were able to get away with things. When you lie in the hereafter, you're not able to get away with things a lot of times. Okay, so that was the first question. Most of you got that right, alhamdulillah. Second question. For those who enter hellfire, why does the Quran not speak of their actions and only of their belief? The first answer was because a disbeliever will always do wrong actions. The second answer was because with disbelief, their actions have no value. The second answer was correct, and 94% of you guys responded with that answer. So that means that essentially what the Quran was saying, يَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ يَوْمَئِذٍ يَتَفَرَّقُونَ, when the Day of Judgment begins, then people start to be, they start to be categorized, so to speak, right? They start to, in other words, as the Quran says, it's يَوْمُ الْفَصْلِ, the day that people are separated from one another, right? And then it said, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, those who believe and do good deeds, فِي رَوْضَةٍ يُحْبَرُونَ. وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَكَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا وَلِقَاءِ الْآخِرَةِ, those who have disbelief and it did not mention their bad deeds, right? So the reason for this is because in the Islamic perspective on this, when someone has disbelief, their actions don't hold any more value, right? So it doesn't matter if they did good, they did bad. The good that they did would not hold any value for them at that point. Okay. So most of you got that answer correct as well. Moving on to question number 3. What does Alhamdulillah mean? All right. So I think I was able to trick just about 13% of you guys. The first answer was all thanks belongs to Allah. Second was I praise Allah. Third answer was I thank Allah. The fourth one was all praise belongs to Allah. The proper response and the correct response is number 4. All praise belongs to Allah. Hamd is different from shukr. Shukr means you thank somebody, but hamd means you praise that individual. There's a difference there. But the point that we were trying to get to, because verse 17 of Surah Al-Rum says, وَلَهُ الْحَمْدُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Hamd and praise belongs to Him in the heavens and in the earth. What that means is that the signs of His greatness, you will find it in the heavens, you will find it in the earth, and therefore praise belongs to Him everywhere. Now, in Surah Al-Hamd, when we say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, a lot of people will translate this and understand this to mean you're thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is kind of true, but slightly different. The meaning is a little bit more precise than that. The meaning is actually saying that anyone who praises anyone or anything in this world, that praise belongs to who? Belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anyone that you find that admires something else, essentially that praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen means. Now, tonight we're going to come back to that. If you hold on and you continue with us, inshallah, we're going to come back to that concept of how the things that you find in this world, all of them relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His attributes. We're going to come back to that. So anytime I see beauty, right, I can connect this to the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How that relates to dua kumail, we'll talk about that as we continue with this session, inshallah. All right, next question was this: what example does the Quran give of bringing life back to the dead? And you all, 88% of you guys got it right, and that was reviving the plants and trees in spring, right? The Quran says, وَيُحْيِي الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings life to an earth or a ground that was dead before. But then the rest of the verse says, وَكَذَلِكَ تُخْرَجُونَ. And this is how you all will be revived, right? So it's teaching us that the resurrection on the Day of Judgment, it will happen in the same exact way that you see in spring, right? The same way you pass by right now and you find everything is blossoming, right? And things were dead before in winter. This is how the dead will be resurrected on the Day of Judgment. All right, next question. Based on verse 20, one of the signs of God is that He created us from dirt. All right, I'm going to lock the responses to this real quick because 87% of you had the wrong answer. Okay, now I'll explain what that means. You say 80%, 87% said it's true. This is the sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The verse of the Quran says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَكُم مِّن تُرَابٍ, that He created you from dirt. ثُمَّ إِذَا أَنْتُمْ بَشَرٌ تَنْتَشِرُونَ. The sign was not that He created you from dirt. The sign was that He created you from dirt, and then all of a sudden you turned into a fully functioning human being. See, that jump was the sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was talking about. We talked about this last week as well. I made a mention of it last week, and I'll just point this out this week as well. That there are those who will argue with evolution. Of course, evolution is something that's a very lengthy discussion. But they'll use this concept of evolution in order to explain that this design that we find in the world and the order that we find in the world, that there is no intellectual, thought process behind it, right? It's just a natural system that's going on, and this is how we find the order in this world, right? And this is what they would call evolution, or evolution that is driven by natural selection. But we mentioned this last week as well, and I'll mention it today as well, that even those evolutionary biologists, as they call themselves, when it comes to life itself and how life evolved, right? How something goes from being dead to being alive, that is something where they are perplexed as well. And I looked this up in that book that I was talking about of Richard Dawkins. It's called The God Delusion, that came out, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago, right? And if you go to page 140, 141, he talks about this, that this whole system of natural selection that we talk about, right? And he's one of the flag bearers of how natural selection, it drives evolution, and it can explain things without a God being in the picture. He explains how you need a little bit of luck in order to get that first piece of life in this world. Then he can explain everything with natural selection from his own perspective, right? But how did that first element of life come into being? That is the part where he himself says that this, it's an unknown part for us, and we can't really explain it. That part is just, you need some luck for that to happen. Then once that happens, then this whole system of evolution can take on from after that. So the sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about here in verse 20 is not that He created us from dirt. It's that He created us from dirt, and then all of a sudden we turned into tantashirun. We turned into a full-fledged human being. This is the sign. This jump that you made from being dirt into being a fully functioning human being. And again, when we go through the verses, we're going to come back to this point as well in the next verses that we have. Before I continue, inshallah, you guys, if you guys are, anyone who's watching, inshallah, on YouTube, you can be part of the live chat as well. And if there are any questions, pointers, anything you want to let me know, you can let us know over there, inshallah. Continuing and moving on, the next question was this: what is the main purpose? Right, let me see if I can get this. Why God has created couples? Oh, yes. Right? The Quran said, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلْقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. We have created couples for you. What is the main purpose The first answer was the proper answer, to find peace and tranquility. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. So we'll talk about that more tonight as well. Continuing. Next question. God says couples are to have mawadda with one another. What does that mean? The first answer was love and affection. Second was mercy and forgiveness. Third one was love that is expressed. And fourth one was generosity that is expressed. And the correct answer was the one that 19% got. And that was love that is expressed. This is the meaning of mawadda, right? Mawaddatan wa rahma. He gave you mawadda, means that he has placed a love that you express to one another. And this denotes that this love is to be expressed between the wife and the husband. All right, moving on. Next question, and I believe this is the last question if I'm not mistaken. Based on verse 21, what is one of the reasons why Islam is opposed to changing the combination of genders in a marriage? Why is it, based on this verse, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow for a Muslim, right, to be engaged in a marriage where this marriage involves a combination different from a male and a female? Why is it? We can have multiple reasons, but based on this verse, we talked about this, and the Mufassirin have talked about this as well, that one of the reasons why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it such is because the couples were created to لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, to create this peace and tranquility. And when you have this peace and tranquility, it only happens when these two genders will complement one another. If they don't complement one another, then the peace and tranquility will not be there. And from the Islamic perspective, it is these two genders that complement one another. The other genders, or the same gender, is not going to be able to complement the same gender. This is one of the reasons I'm emphasizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not allowed us to change this combination from male and female to male and male, or female and female. Because the whole purpose of the marriage is not going to be fulfilled at that point. All right, that was the last question. Thank you to everyone who responded, and I will go straight into the discussion that we have for tonight. Before I jump into tonight's discussion, I just want to touch on one beautiful hadith, and this is a hadith I read about a week ago, and it really, really blew my mind because it puts very beautifully into perspective what happens when somebody is in touch with the Quran and recites Quran and understands the Quran even more importantly. Okay, now this hadith is explaining what's going to happen on the Day of Judgment, right? And the Ma'asum says that on the Day of Judgment, the Quran will, he will take on a physical form, or at least maybe not a physical form, but a form through which people can see the Quran, right? The Quran has a reality beyond this reality that we know of this book, and there's a lot of discussion about this. But the Quran is a reality. That's why on the Day of Judgment we have hadith that Quran does shafa'at of those who used to follow him. One of the things that does shafa'at on that day is the Quran itself, which means that the Quran itself is a living being. Okay, that's a longer discussion, but we'll just leave it at that. Now, this hadith explains that on the Day of Judgment, when people are lined up, right, and they are in this area that we call, or this place where everyone is gathered, that the Quran calls mahshar, where everyone hashr is done to them, everyone is gathered over there. Okay, people are lined up. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this hadith, it explains that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the Quran this physical appearance, and the Quran starts to walk in front of the lines of people who are lined up, specifically in front of the Muslims. Okay, now this Quran is walking in front of the Muslims. As it's walking in front of the Muslims, many of these Muslims will not recognize what the Quran is. They will just see that there is this being that's walking, and this being is its light is emanating from him, and that he is very, very beautiful. But they don't know what it is. And the hadith says that as these people are walking in the presence of the Quran says, or the hadith says, that these individuals will look at the Quran and they will say, we don't know what this is. But whatever it is that's walking in our presence, we know that this is something, he's probably one of the very good servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's definitely amongst us, but we don't know him because he's so great. He must be one of the closest servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the hadith says he comes and he continues and he passes by the Muslims, then he passes by the shuhada. Even the shuhada will not recognize him. They will say, well, he's a very, very beautiful creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he must be a great person. Right? But maybe he is one of the shuhada, but one of the special shuhada. That's why we don't recognize him either. Then passes on in front of the prophets. Some of the prophets will not recognize the Quran either. And the hadith is a very long one, so I'm summarizing it. And then the Quran comes and sits, as the hadith says, by the arsh, by the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. Now, what is the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Well, we don't know exactly what it is. All we know is that this throne and this arsh is used in the verses of the Quran and in hadith to kind of be a symbol of the power of God and where God commands things from. That's what we know of this arsh and of this throne. Nonetheless, the Quran comes and sits, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces to the people that this is the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, He addresses the Quran, He says, listen, you tell me which one of these guys dealt with you in the right way, and which one of you they did injustice to you. Now, this injustice could be meaning anything, but one of them that we could possibly understand from this hadith is not even opening it up. If we don't even open up the Quran, right? It's a form of injustice to the Quran, right? So, the hadith says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the Quran, says, tell me which one of these guys dealt with you in a good manner. And the hadith says that the Quran walks and walks and walks until he stands in front of one of our people, one of our Shia, right? He says, this one was the one who would spend time to understand me. Kana ya'rifuni. He used to understand what I used to say, right? Meaning, he took the time to actually read me. He took the time to, understand what I'm saying. And then he used the logic that I had in order to defend the religion of yours. He's referring to God. The Quran is referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hadith continues until a point comes where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, okay, you, the Quran, because this person dealt with you in this way, what do you think I should give him? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts to reward him with certain things. He says, is this enough? The Quran says, no, this is not enough. You need to give him even more. Okay, then the Quran, the hadith says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then makes a promise to the Quran regarding this individual, or it might be these individuals who knew the Quran and would respect the Quran, and they did not do injustice to the Quran by reading it and understanding it, one form of that, right? And then the hadith says this, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees that the Quran is not okay, in other words, He's not satisfied with what God has already given to these individuals, right? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, He says, okay, now that I want to satisfy you, O Quran, I will give these guys 5 things. Number 1, لَأَنْحَلَنَّ لَهُ الْيَوْمِ خَمْسَةَ أَشْيَاء مَعَ الْمَزِيدِ لَهُ وَلِمَنْ كَانَ بِمَنْزِلَتِهِ أَلَا. First one, إِنَّهُمْ شَبَابٌ لَا يَهْرَمُونَ. They will be young, right? They will never get old. They will never have to deal with the difficulties, right? The physical difficulties and the struggles of getting older. No, they will always feel youthful. Okay, number 1, وَأَصِحَّاءُ لَا يَسْقُمُونَ. And they will always feel healthy. They will never ever feel the taste of feeling sick anymore, right? It's a very difficult test of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This virus that's going around, and some people, they don't take it seriously. Only thing they look at is the number of deaths, right? But that's not the way you're supposed to look at it, because even if someone doesn't die, the difficulty that you go through, right, is quite, it's very difficult. The things that you hear, the experiences that people have. So you want to take things seriously right now. Anyways, وَأَصِحَّاءُ لَا يَسْقُمُونَ وَأَغْنِيَاءُ لَا يَفْتَقِرُونَ. These guys will always be wealthy. وَفَرِحُونَ لَا يَحْزَنُونَ. They will always be happy from this point onwards, right? وَأَحْيَاءٌ لَا يَمُوتُونَ. And they will always be alive, and they will never die again. They will never taste the taste of death again in their lives. All of this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to the one who takes time to understand the Quran and to benefit from the logic, the teachings of the Quran. That's why in our communities, inshallah, we have to spend more time on the Quran. We unfortunately have not done a good job of that. So I'll continue, inshallah. Again, like I mentioned, the live chat is there, so if anyone has questions, you can let me know, and inshallah, I can take a look at the questions. And assalamu alaikum to both of the comments that I find here. Thank you. So we'll continue, inshallah. The verses that we were discussing were verses 21. That's where we stopped. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. And one of his signs is that he will create for you, for you, couples, min anfusikum, from yourselves. They're from the same fabric that you come from. Okay. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. We explained this last week, so that you will find peace and tranquility, right? وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. And he has placed amongst you مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. And he has placed amongst you mawadda, a love that you express, and rahmatan. Now, and mercy, right? Now, I want to emphasize this point, that in this verse you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is explaining two different elements, right? And I cannot explain, brothers and sisters, or I can't emphasize enough the importance of both of these elements, right? In a mutual life or in a marital life, where someone is dealing with their spouse, for example, right? So if you're married, you can apply this from this moment onwards. If you're not, then you can prepare for this, right? And we talked about this last week as well. Marriage isn't something you prepare for 6 months before the marriage. That's not how it works. You prepare for marriage 10 years before you get married, because those are habits that you have to work on. These habits, they have been there already for 10, 15 years, 20 years. You can't just get rid of them overnight, right? Now, this verse of the Quran is emphasizing two elements. It's saying, first of all, we place this love between you, this affection between you that is expressed. Okay, that makes sense. And then it says, وَرَحْمَةً. And then we put this mercy there. Okay, the mercy, we talked about this last week. We said that this mercy means you look at someone or something and you find that they are lacking of something. And because of that, you have a little bit of a mercy in your heart. This is what mercy is. That feeling you get in your heart when you find someone is lacking something that you might have or you might be able to give to them. What does this mean on a practical level? On a practical level, this means that in a marriage and in a marital life, right, and in a family, not only is there supposed to be love and affection, right, and not only are you supposed to express that, and I'll come back to that point, but there is also supposed to be a sense of me having mercy and being merciful. Love is not the, be all, end all of everything, right? That's not how love works. Love will take care of a portion of the problem, right? Then there has to be mercy. What does that mean? That means that sometimes you look at somebody and you really, really love them, right? And there's a lot of admiration that you have towards them. But then there are other times where you find what you see in that person. You see that person is lacking of certain things. What's supposed to help you in that situation is the mercy that you feel inside of your heart, right? You are supposed to feel merciful. Grab the hand of someone who's down. Who's this person who's down? It's your wife or it's your husband. They have certain attributes. They have weaknesses. They have strengths. As it's your job to understand the weaknesses and the strengths of your spouse. A lot of people don't even observe this, which is, kind of mind-blowing when you're around people who don't do that. They don't even observe. If you were to ask them, what is it that your husband or wife is sensitive towards? What are the weaknesses of your wife or husband? Or what are the strengths of your wife or husband? They won't even be able to tell you. Right? So that's one problem. But first of all, you're supposed to observe them. And second of all, you're supposed to grab their hand when you see they're struggling with certain things. I know, for example, that my husband, wife, they are sensitive when it comes to this arena. Or they are weak when it comes to this arena. I have to show that mercy because I'm aware of it, right? So I have to show that I see them lacking an attribute. I have to hold their hand, right? And give them my hand when they are going through that difficult position. That means sometimes they might come home, they might be upset about something, for example. Why? Because someone said something in an area about them where they are sensitive, right? And for wife and husband, it might be completely different from one another, right? But when you see that they're sensitive, this element of rahmah has to come into the picture. Mawadda is one thing, love is one thing, but then are you merciful towards one another, right? This mercy has to come into the picture, that you say, well, I know that she lacks this attribute. She lacks patience when it comes to these situations. He lacks patience when it comes to these situations. I always have to use both pronouns when I'm talking about this topic so that I don't get angry, comments from either gender afterwards, right? So regardless, anyways, that's more of a joke, of course. But on a serious note, you look at what they lack and then you try to complement them. This is why the Quran says you have to have mawadda, you have to have that love, and you have to have the rahmah at the same time. So mawadda, we said, it's the love that you express. I don't think I need to explain this too much, but the love, you need to express this love, right? It's not this love where you just have it in your heart. Yes, I love you. I told you 10 years ago, when we got married, I love you. Okay, so it's enough. It's not enough. You need to express it, and we have more ahadith about this as well, that talk about this quite a bit as well. All right, we have a couple questions. So the first question is, can you explain why Quran will not recognize even some of the prophets? Well, the hadith was saying that some of the prophets will not recognize the Quran. So that's what the hadith was saying. But that's a good question. I don't know why exactly in that hadith it says that. Part of it might be because the Quran might have this really, really magnificent look that is different from how it normally looks. Because the hadith says that when he goes and speaks to that Shia person who was used to read him, he changes his face back to the way he used to look. So maybe that is why some of the prophets do not recognize him. So that's one question. The second question, okay. What is the level of listening to Quran and reading Quran? Really, we don't have a specific level. But in the ahadith it says, for example, someone who doesn't recite, sometimes it says 10 verses a day. Sometimes it says 50 verses a day, right? At least 10 verses a day. What I suggest to people always is half an hour. Half an hour, pick up the Quran, right? Read a couple verses. And if you don't understand the Arabic, then read the translation with it, right? And if you have questions, then that's why you have, scholars, and you just send their questions. I mean, we don't have a lack of access to scholars at this point, living in the world that we live in, right? I mean, who would have thought, 20 years ago, you just do a live chat and you send in questions like this. So we don't have a lack of that anymore. But there is no specific level to it, but roughly that's what the level that the Quran is talking about. Okay, continuing from this point onwards, I've already talked about, yes, we covered all of this. I'm going to move on to the next verse. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And from his signs are the creation of the heavens and earth, which is a very general term, of course, the creation of the heavens and earth. There's millions of things and billions of things that have been created in this heavens and earth. So this part of the verse, which is verse 22, is more of an introductory part of the verse so that the Quran can then get to the other part. What's the other part? وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ. Very beautiful. The Quran says that amongst his signs is the fact that you all come from different languages and you come from different colors. Of course, what the Quran is talking about when it says colors, it means from a racial perspective, right? In terms of your races, you come from all of these different races, right? Now, it's interesting that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken as one of his most beautiful signs, right? وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ. One of his signs is that you come from different races. Is that the human beings, as ignorant as we are, we take this, right? And we use this as an excuse to be negative about one another, right? We use this as an excuse to exclude people at times, right? And a lot of times you will find this, and I'm just being frank here, that a lot of times in our communities even you will find this, right? You will find if a person walks in and they're from a different ethnicity and not from the ethnicity that you're from, how often would brothers and sisters in the masjid, in the center, in the community, would they walk towards them, welcome them, and make them feel at home? Right? That doesn't happen too often, unfortunately. I know that because a lot of people have told me that they went here, there, wherever the case may be, and they went there for the first time and they didn't feel welcome at all. Why? Because maybe they weren't from the same background, right? Maybe they didn't look the same, and that's dangerous because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying this is one of your signs. This is one of my signs that you all come from different backgrounds. And the beautiful thing is when you look at the Prophet and the close circle that he had around him, of course the Sahabi of the Prophet were in the thousands if you consider, people who spent time with the Prophet or saw the Prophet, right? It just depends on how you define it. But regardless, there were thousands of people who saw the Prophet. But in his closer circle of the Prophet, you find in this closer circle, they came from so many different backgrounds, so many different races at times, right? So for example, in this close circle of the Prophet, you have, for example, Bilal. Bilal, where did Bilal come from? He came from Habasha. He came from Ethiopia, where his background was, right? Ethiopia, right? Northeast, Africa, or the part of Africa is very close to the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, that's where Bilal came from. Okay, close companion of the Prophet. Then you had Salman. Salman came from where? He came from another corner of the world. He came from Persia, and we all know his story. And of course, if we get a chance sometime, we'll discuss that, of the adventure that Salman went through in order to get to where the Prophet was, right, in Medina. Because he joined the Prophet in Medina. He never even had a chance to see or witness the Prophet when the Prophet was still in Mecca. So you have Bilal, he's from Africa. And then you have Salman from Persia. Right? And then you have Abu Dhar. Abu Dhar, his name is Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, although we say Ghafari a lot of times, but the correct name is Ghifar. Because his tribe was known as Ghifar. His tribe was known as a group of people that would rob caravans. Right? That's the type of background he came from. So a completely different background than someone like Salman and someone like Bilal. Okay. And then you have another companion of the Prophet who grew up in the Roman Empire. His name was Suhaib al-Rumi, famous companion of the Prophet. We don't know too much about his life, but he was part of the inner circle of the Prophet, so to speak, right? Each one of them came from a different corner of the world, and yet they all would sit together, they would eat together, and they would do things together. And we pray that one day these ideals and these teachings, inshallah, it will be implemented one day in our community. It's not easy, it's difficult, but hopefully we can get there one day. So he says, this is one of your signs. اختلاف ألسنتكم, your languages and your tongues, they're very different. Oh, boy, are they different, right? Very different. I remember every time, when I moved back here after my studies were done and started, lecturing different places and whatnot, and I would hear brothers and sisters speak Urdu, right? They would say, oh, Maulana, Urdu, it's actually a mixture of English, Farsi, and Arabic, right? So learning Urdu isn't that difficult, actually. I don't know if there are any, non-Urdu speakers out there. Maybe you've had something like that before. Let me just tell you, learning it is not easy. That's what they used to tell me, right? The moment I would hear a sentence in Urdu that said that's neither Arabic nor Farsi nor English, and yet brothers and sisters would still tell me, no, it's either this or it's English or Arabic or Farsi. Well, I know all three of those, but I don't know what it is that is being said right now. This is ikhtilafu al-sinatikum, and it's beautiful. The Quran is saying this is beautiful, right? That you guys speak with different languages, and you all come from different colors / cultures / backgrounds as well. That's what the Quran is pointing out here in verse 22. Moving on. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. There are signs in this for those who have knowledge. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, and from amongst his signs, مَنَامُكُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ, and from his signs are you sleeping during the night and during the day, right? This is really one of the mysterious phenomena that we find in the world today. Just the concept of sleep, right? And as the science is coming out about it more and more, it's just getting more and more mind-blowing, really. The kind of effects that sleep has on the mind of a person, right? On the body of a person. The type of healing that happens inside of the body when someone goes to sleep. The type of learning that happens when someone goes to sleep, right? All of these different things, the type of emotional rejuvenation that happens when someone goes to sleep. These are things that the human being is just beginning to understand at this point, right? And even from a scientific perspective, it's still kind of a mystery for us, right? What happens when someone goes to sleep? Now, Islamically, we have a perspective on this, right? And this is discussed when we discuss the concept of dreams, right? So Islam has its own take on this. But from a scientific perspective, as it relates to our physical aspect, what happens? Is it a chemical reaction that happens inside of the body? Is it a physical reaction, right? Is it something that has to do with the neurons in the brain? What's going on when someone goes to sleep? It's not, crystal clear to us still. All we see is we just observe the results that it has, and it's mind-blowing. The type of effects that it has when someone has less sleep compared to when they have the proper amount of sleep. And if you look at athletes, right, they will tell you the most important thing for them in order to rejuvenate their bodies, right, is what? Is sleep. So what happens in this 6 to 8 hours that you cannot get outside of sleep? No matter what pill you take, no matter what medicine you take, no matter what nutrition you have, if you don't get that proper sleep, it's not going to work. It's one of the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَابْتِغَاؤُكُم مِّن فَضْلِهِ. He says, and the fact that you guys go out there and you ask and seek the sustenance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I ask you, many of you worked from home today, what do you do when you want to seek from the sustenance, from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What do? You go, you work. How do you work? You use your intellectual abilities and your intellectual faculties. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying the fact that the human being is created in such a manner that in the morning he wakes up, he goes out there and he searches for this rizq, right? But how does he do that? In order to do that, he has to employ and utilize so many different intellectual abilities and faculties inside of himself. And then we have built this system where he can come back at night, he can sleep at night, and he can be rejuvenated again and go at it again the next day as well. Quran is saying this system and how it's self-sustaining in the sense that you work and you might get tired and you get fatigued and then you come back and you get sleep and you're ready again to go back. This system is a sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَسْمَعُونَ. It says, certainly in that are signs for people who listen, essentially. Okay, moving on. He says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ يُرِيكُمُ الْبَرْقَ خَوْفًا وَتَمَعًا. And from his signs is that he will show you al-barqa, referring to lightning. He will show you the lightning, خَوْفًا وَتَمَعًا. And when this lightning strikes, right, it depends. Some people scream. Hopefully you're not part of those group of people, right? You're not supposed to scream. But then there are other than that, there's two categories of people. There are some who are worried, right? Because lightning, it can come with its own dangers. And then this is khawfan, right? And then watama'an. And also he shows it to you as a sign that his mercy is going to come. What is that mercy? That mercy is the rain that is going to pour down. This is tama'an, you looking forward to the fact that you saw the lightning. You are assuming and anticipating that the rain is going to come afterwards. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ يُرِيكُمُ الْبَرْقَ خَوْفًا وَتَمَعًا وَيُنَزِّلُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً. And he sends down from the skies a water فَيُحْيِي بِهِ الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا. And with this water, and again we don't understand this is again one of the mysteries that we have in this world, that with this water all of a sudden things that were dead before, they are alive all of a sudden. This water, and other verses of the Quran talk about this, that everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created that is alive, this is done through water, has some connection to water, right? And this is why you find scientists even now, when they're looking for life on other, planets, one of the things they search for is what? They also search for water, because with that water, the life is going to come with it, right? And this explains to us another verse in the Quran that some of you guys might have heard before, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَانَ عَرْشُهُ عَلَى الْمَاءِ. His throne is upon water, right? So one of the understandings of that verse is that the reason why his throne is upon water means that his creation, everything he does, is based on the power of the livelihood of water. Right? Now that's a separate discussion. We're not going to go into that. But that is, that's one of the verses that I hear a lot of people read and it's very unclear to them. This can potentially explain that verse for us. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ. And from his signs, أَن تَقُومَ السَّمَاءُ وَالْأَرْضُ بِأَمْرِهِ. And from his signs is that the heaven or the sky and the earth, taqum, it is standing. In other words, it is consistently, moving in order. Right? This is qiyam. When they say qiyam, they call qiyam because when you stand up, you are in your most consistent form, right, when you're standing. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ. And from his signs is that the heaven and the earth, that they exist consistently. Right? Think about it, that with every little piece that we have in the world, right? And scientists talk about this as well, that you could have huge masses that are just, lying around in space. that could just hit the earth, right? And they would create the corruption that you could not even imagine. And yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has managed things, right, for millions of years, right, in such a way that, nothing goes wrong. This is taqum as-sama wal-ardu bi-amrihi. The heavens and the earth, or the sky and the earth, right, consistently exist without it running into problems. Or as Surah Al-Ra'd says, verse number 2 of Surah Al-Ra'd says, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is holding these planets in the air, right, بِغَيْرَ عَمَدٍ تَرَوْنَهَا, with columns that you guys don't see, right? Who's holding these planets? Right? Now, I will say this one point before I move on very quickly, that there are times, some of us might have had these thoughts at times, that you sit there and you think, you're like, is he really out there? Did he really create this? These are, thoughts and doubts that come to your mind. Whenever these thoughts and doubts come to the mind of the human being, there's only one question that you would need to ask yourself. And that question is this: well, who's taking care of these planets? That's the only question. If you have an answer for that, then, you don't want to believe in God, you want to believe in whoever else is doing it, go ahead and do that. But we don't have any other answer for it, right? When these doubts come to our mind, it's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is holding these planets up بِغَيْرَ عَمَدٍ تَرَوْنَهَا, with columns that we cannot see. Okay, moving on from that. ثُمَّ إِذَا دَعَاكُمْ دَعْوَةً مِنَ الْأَرْضِ إِذَا أَنْتُمْ تَخْرُجُونَ. Then when He calls you all on the day of judgment, you all will leave. You will leave from where? You will leave from your graves. And the verses of the Quran say that people will leave the grave in different ways. Some of them will be rushing, some of them will be going slowly. Okay, moving on. وَلَهُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ كُلٌّ لَهُ قَانِتُونَ. And everything everyone in the heavens and the earth is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and everyone is doing qunut for Him, but from a literal perspective. Qunut means that everyone is submitting himself to Him, right? Everything is under the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what qunut means. And when we do qunut in our salat, essentially we are showing our humility and submitting ourselves to Him. Okay. وَهُوَ الَّذِي يَبْدَأُ الْخَلْقَ ثُمَّ يُعِيدُهُ. And I'll explain this verse and I'll end. وَهُوَ الَّذِي يَبْدَأُ الْخَلْقَ ثُمَّ يُعِيدُهُ. He is the one who begins creation. ثُمَّ يُعِيدُهُ. And then He does it again. Does it again when? On the day of judgment. وَهُوَ أَهْوَنُ عَلَيْهِ. And that is easier for Him. This is the Quran using rhetoric in order to explain to these disbelievers. These disbelievers used to say, and in the ahadith we have, that they used to come to the Prophet, and some of them used to bring rocks or bones and say, what, this bone, this dry bone, you're telling me this is going to come back to life? The Quran has a very beautiful logic. It says, listen, He did it once, right? Why do you think He can't repeat it when repeating something would naturally be easier? Easier for God? No, for Him it doesn't make a difference. There's no easier or difficult for Him. Easier in the minds of you all, if you consider, God, in the light of a human being, at least in the light of a human being. Even for a human being, it's easier to repeat something than to do it for the first time. Right? So it's easier for Him to do it on the day of judgment. Why does He say it's not possible for Him to pull it off on the day of judgment? وَهُوَ أَهْوَنُ عَلَيْهِ. And then this part is a very beautiful part of the verse. وَلَهُ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And for Him is the best example in the heavens and in the earth. What is this part of the verse talking about? This is a little unclear unless you refer to the tafasir and really understand what this verse is talking about. This part of the verse is talking about. He says the best example is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The best example when it comes to what? The best example of every good attribute is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You talk about mercy, He has the ultimate version of that. You talk about forgiveness, He has the ultimate version of that. You talk about generosity, wealth, beauty, power, whatever you want to talk about. He has the ultimate versions of all of those good attributes. In other words, whatever you find in this world, every creature in this world manifests certain attributes, some good attributes, right? You look at a flower, it manifests the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You look at a lion, it manifests, right, the intiqam, the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You look at, for example, other things that we find in this world, they will manifest the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? You will look at certain animals that can see everything. They are manifesting the basar, Basir of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every creature is manifesting a certain attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the only difference is that this animal or this human being that's manifesting that attribute is doing that to a limited degree. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the best example of that same attribute. It's the ultimate version of that same attribute. You have mercy, right? But you have 10 degrees of it and He has unlimited degrees of it, for example. You have wealth, you have money, right? But then He has the ultimate amount of wealth, right? Now, in Dua Kumail, there's a line that actually talks about this and that we read all the time. And that line is this: وَبِأَسْمَائِكَ الَّتِي مَلَأَتْ أَرْكَانَ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by His names that have filled the foundations of everything. Okay, what does that mean? That means that every creature's existence and essence, if you break it down, it will be broken down into different attributes. These attributes are the different names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this creature is manifesting, right? Just like a flower, it is manifesting the beauty. It is manifesting the name of Al-Jamil of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And every single creature is the same. Now, what does this do? What this does is that now when you look at everything in this world, you just see every good attribute in this world, whether it's beauty, it's wealth, generosity, whatever good thing there is in this world, you just see it as a mere reflection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, God has ultimate beauty, but He has given some of His beauty to this individual. He's given some of His beauty to flowers. He's given some of His beauty to human beings. Some human beings, for example. Some more, some less. Right? There's no problem in saying that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given from His wealth more and less to some people. Right? For beauty, He gave more to Yusuf alayhi salam and He gave less to other people. But the point is that every creature, if you break it down, it's really just a reflection of different attributes. Every one of these attributes is one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only difference is this name, when it comes to this animal, is being manifested in a limited version. But when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is the ultimate version. That's why the verse says, وَلَهُ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. When it comes to the creatures of the heaven and the earth, He has the ultimate version of everything that they have. All right, and I'll end with this. وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. And He is the one who is Aziz, He's mighty. What is this talking about? He's explaining, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate version of everything, right? Naturally, He will be the one who has the greatest might. Because if He didn't have something, then He will succumb to, and He will be submitted to something else that has more power than Him, more of that good attribute than He does. That's why the verse is saying, He is mighty. He is the mighty one. Right? He is the one who has izzah. Right? Why? Because He's the most complete and perfect one. It says, okay, that's when it comes to His attributes. وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. He is the all-wise. Why? Because if He didn't have all of these good attributes, then these good attributes, the lack of them, would show itself in His actions, and that would go against His wisdom. See how Allama Tabatabai connects this Huwa al-Azizul Hakim to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being perfect and having all of the good attributes. So everything we find in this world, and I'll end with this inshallah, everything we find in this world is really a manifestation of one or a number of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of them are part of the Asma'ul Husna of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only difference is in these Asma'ul Husna, when it comes to us and animals and everything in this world, we portray them in a limited manner and a limited fashion, whereas when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does the same thing in the ultimate manner and in the ultimate fashion. Inshallah, with that, I'm going to bring tonight's talk to an end, and we can, inshallah, I'm just going to check to see if we have any questions before I end, and if not, we will bring the session to an end, inshallah. Okay, I don't see any more questions. We had a couple, and thank you for those who were here today with us. Inshallah, we'll continue next Thursday. One thing I will mention before we end is that this upcoming the Wednesday that is Nime Sha'ban, right? So not this Wednesday, the next Wednesday. Inshallah, we're gonna have a live session here, And what we will be doing is that inshallah I'll be going through the a'mal, some of the a'mal, not all of them. So we'll have a lecture, and then also be going through some of the a'mal live, like we do with this live stream. I'll be going through it, and other thing we'll be doing is that we'll be explaining some of the a'mal as we go through them. Usually we do these a'mal, and sometimes parents do them at home, and the children have no idea really what's going on, and it's not their fault. It's a different language, and sometimes the parents don't even know what's happening in these a'mal, and it's really a shame because we miss out really on the meaning of these du'as that we're reading. So what we'll do for Nime Sha'ban Wednesday night, 8:30 p.m. inshallah, is that we will be going through we'll do the lecture, and then we'll have some a'mal, specifically some of the du'as that are recommended for the night of Nime Sha'ban. We'll be going through that, and then in English I'll be explaining some of the lines of the du'as so that we all understand what we're reading and what we are doing, inshallah. So we'll look forward to that, inshallah. And next Thursday and Friday, of course, we will have our regular programs. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.